banking on betrayal, how I took down the institution that betrayed me. The most dangerous person in any institution isn't the one who openly opposes it. It's the loyal insider who suddenly has nothing left to lose. 10 years. That's how long I gave to Meridian Financial. A decade of my life, dedicated to a place that discarded me like yesterday's trash. But this story isn't just about being fired. It's about what happens when powerful people mistake loyalty for weakness, when they forget that the same person who helped build their fortress also knows exactly where the cracks are. They thought I would just walk away with my cardboard box of desk plants and family photos. They were wrong, so very wrong. My name is Alex Morgan, and this is the story of how I brought one of the largest regional banks in the Northeast to its knees. I started at Meridian fresh out of business school, bright-eyed, ambitious, ready to climb the corporate ladder. I was hired as a junior compliance officer, but I quickly moved up. By year 3, I was heading the regulatory compliance department. By year 5, I was working directly with the executive team on strategic initiatives. Alex is our secret weapon, my boss, EVP Catherine Walsh, used to say. The person who makes sure we stay on the right side of the law while maximizing our opportunities. I loved my job, believed in the bank's mission, and trusted the leadership. Or at least, I thought I did. What I didn't realize was that while I was ensuring our public-facing operations remained compliant, there was an entirely different operation happening behind closed doors. It started with small things, pressure to approve loans that didn't quite meet regulatory standards, being asked to reinterpret certain compliance guidelines, documentation that mysteriously disappeared from our files. When I raised concerns, Catherine would smile that practiced smile of hers. "Alex, you're so by the book. That's why we need you. But sometimes books need creative interpretations." I should have seen the signs. The late-night meetings I wasn't invited to. The new Special Projects Division that reported directly to the CEO. The way certain high-net-worth clients received preferential treatment that stretched far beyond the usual perks. But I was loyal, dedicated, and far too trusting. During my 6th year, I noticed something particularly troubling. A pattern of large loans being approved for properties that seemed significantly overvalued. The collateral assessments were all performed by the same third-party appraiser, and the loan-to-value ratios were suspiciously perfect, just within our policy limits. "I need to review the Westbrook development loan package again," I told my assistant one morning. "Something doesn't add up." That afternoon, Catherine stopped by my office, perching casually on the edge of my desk. "Alex, I heard you're digging into the Westbrook loan." "Just doing my due diligence," I replied. "The appraisal seems inflated based on comparable properties in the area." She tapped her manicured fingernails on my desk. "The CEO personally signed off on that one. Mr. Westbrook is a special relationship. Why don't you focus on the consumer compliance audit instead? That's where the regulatory risk really is these days." I nodded, but that night I stayed late, combing through similar loans. By midnight, I had identified 12 properties, all appraised at 20 to 30% above market value, all approved for maximum financing, all connected to 3 developers who regularly played golf with our CEO. The next morning, I drafted a memo outlining my concerns and the potential regulatory violations. I never sent it. That same day, Catherine announced that all commercial loan compliance reviews would now go through the Special Projects Division first to streamline the process. They were building walls to keep me from seeing the full picture. I just didn't realize it at the time. It was a Tuesday morning when my world collapsed. I arrived at work to find my keycard deactivated. Security escorted me to Catherine's office, where she sat with Roger Klein, our stone-faced HR director. "We're restructuring the compliance department," Catherine said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Your position has been eliminated." "Restructuring," I echoed. "I'm the head of compliance." What kind of restructuring eliminates that? We're outsourcing most compliance functions, Roger interjected. It's a cost-saving measure. That was the official story. But as security watched me pack my things, I noticed James Peterson, a recent hire with connections to our CEO, but half my experience, being ushered into the executive conference room. The same James who had argued against my recent report, flagging suspicious transactions from several high-profile clients. You can't just eliminate the compliance department, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. The regulators would never. We're not eliminating compliance, Roger interrupted. We're just reimagining it. More integrated with business objectives. Translation: making it a rubber stamp instead of an actual check on risky behavior. As security walked me to the elevator, we passed the glass-walled conference room. Inside, James was smiling, shaking hands with the executive team. On the whiteboard behind him, I could make out the words Project Lighthouse and something about alternative compliance frameworks. I later learned that the bank wasn't outsourcing anything. James had simply convinced the executive team that I was too rigid in my interpretations, that I was holding the bank back from certain innovative financial products. Translation: I wasn't willing to look the other way. As I was escorted out the front doors, the same doors I'd walked through proudly for a decade, Catherine caught up with me. Alex, this isn't personal. It's just business. I turned to her, 10 years of loyalty suddenly crystallizing into something harder, colder. No, Catherine, personal is exactly what this is about to become. I walked to my car in a daze, the cardboard box heavy in my arms. Inside was a framed award. Compliance Officer of the Year from the State Banking Association. The irony wasn't lost on me. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the wall, replaying every conversation, every meeting, every strange request over the past few years. The pieces were starting to fit together, and the picture they formed was ugly. My phone pinged with messages from colleagues, some offering sympathy, others awkwardly distant, as if my firing might be contagious. The most telling was from my former deputy, Lisa. I'm so sorry, Alex. They're having us sign new confidentiality agreements tomorrow. Something about enhanced information compartmentalization. I don't like what's happening here. Neither did I, and I was beginning to realize that being fired might have been the best thing that could have happened to me, because now I could see the whole board, not just the pieces they wanted me to see. The first week after being fired, I was in shock. The second week, depression set in. By the third week, something else had taken root: determination. I still had friends at Meridian, people who were just as disturbed by the bank's shifting ethical standards as I had been. One evening, my former colleague Mia called. "You won't believe what they're doing now," she whispered. "The Special Projects Division. They've created a structured investment vehicle to hide underperforming loans from the balance sheet. They're calling it Project Lighthouse." That call was the spark. I began collecting information, carefully, methodically. Not to blackmail or extort, but to expose. Mia wasn't the only one uncomfortable with the new direction. Others began to reach out. Emails were forwarded, documents were copied. I created a secure digital repository, organizing everything meticulously. Loan approvals that violated regulatory standards. Internal communications discussing how to work around compliance issues. The offshore accounts where certain funds were being temporarily parked during audits. Lisa, my former deputy, was particularly helpful. Her new role gave her access to the documentation for Project Lighthouse. What she found disturbed her enough to risk her job. They're creating a separate entity to buy non-performing loans from the bank at near full value, she explained over coffee one Sunday morning, far from any Meridian branches. It makes the bank's books look clean, but the entity is funded almost entirely by the bank itself through a complex series of transactions. It's basically moving money from one pocket to another, but making it look like the bad loans are gone. That's accounting fraud, I said, the implications sinking in. If the regulators found out, they've got regulatory relations handling the examiners, Lisa interrupted. Controlled access to information, guided tours of selected operations. They're only seeing what Meridian wants them to see. But I needed more than internal documents. I needed to understand the full scope of what Meridian was doing. So I became an investigator. I tracked down former clients whose loans had been mysteriously restructured. I researched the shell companies that kept appearing in transaction records. I built a comprehensive map of Meridian's operations, both the legitimate ones and the shadows behind them. One name kept appearing in my research: Venture East Holdings. This company had received over $200 million in Meridian loans, despite having almost no visible business operations. Following this thread led me to a series of luxury real estate developments, all financed by Meridian, all significantly behind schedule or under-occupied, yet all still carried on the books at full value. I reached out to a former colleague who had moved to a real estate investment firm. These properties are worth maybe 60% of what Meridian has them valued at, he confirmed after reviewing the details. If they had to liquidate these assets, they'd take a massive loss. That explained why they needed Project Lighthouse, to hide the true state of these loans from regulators and shareholders. 3 months in, I had enough to go to the authorities. But there was a problem. Meridian's chairman had deep political connections. The bank was the largest employer in 3 counties. They made generous donations to both political parties. Would anyone really want to take them on? I needed leverage. I needed public pressure. I needed to make this story impossible to ignore. And then I found it, my way in. I had been focusing on the loans themselves, but the real story was who was receiving them. Through property records and corporate filings, I traced the ownership of Venture East Holdings to a network of shell companies. And behind those companies, a real estate developer with documented ties to organized crime. Project Lighthouse wasn't just hiding bad loans. It was being used to conceal the fact that Meridian was essentially functioning as a money laundering operation for certain clients, including a real estate developer with known ties to organized crime. This wasn't just regulatory corner cutting anymore. This was criminal. I spent another month verifying this connection, gathering irrefutable evidence. I couldn't afford any mistakes. The people involved wouldn't hesitate to discredit me, or worse, if I came forward with incomplete information. By month 5 of my investigation, I had constructed a detailed timeline of events, documented the flow of money, identified the key players, and collected statements from former employees and clients. I had created a massive web of evidence, each strand reinforcing the others. Now it was time to strike. The execution, I created a plan with 3 simultaneous fronts of attack. Regulatory action, a comprehensive, meticulously documented report to the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the FDIC, and the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Media exposure, a carefully prepared package of evidence for Diane Reynolds, an investigative journalist known for her coverage of financial fraud. Internal disruption, a strategic email to Meridian's board of directors and major shareholders, detailing exactly what the executive team had been hiding from them. But I needed to ensure my own protection first. I consulted with a whistleblower attorney who helped me structure my disclosures to maximize my legal protections. I set up secure communication channels. I made arrangements for temporary relocation if necessary. "They're going to come after you hard," my attorney warned. "Their reputation, their freedom, billions of dollars, it's all on the line. Are you absolutely sure you want to do this?" I thought about all the people who would be hurt when Meridian inevitably collapsed. The employees, the small business customers, the communities that depended on the bank. Then I thought about what would happen if these practices continued unchecked, growing larger and more dangerous until their eventual, inevitable collapse caused even more widespread damage. "I'm sure," I replied. Some fires need to be controlled burns, or they'll become wildfires. Timing was everything. The regulators needed to receive the information first, so they couldn't be accused of only acting after media pressure. The board needed to be blindsided right before their quarterly meeting, and the media story needed to break when it would receive maximum attention. I set everything in motion on a Sunday night. By 8 a.m. Monday, the regulators had my full report. At 10 a.m., as the board meeting began, my email hit their inboxes. And at noon, when trading was at its peak, Diane Reynolds published her first article, Banking in the Shadows: How Meridian Financial Created a House of Cards. The response was immediate. Meridian's stock plummeted 18% within hours. Trading was temporarily halted. The board meeting, scheduled for 2 hours, stretched into the evening. But this was just the beginning. What I hadn't anticipated was Catherine's response. Rather than circling the wagons, she saw an opportunity to save herself. By Tuesday morning, she was cooperating with investigators, offering details about decisions that had been, according to her, forced through by the CEO despite compliance concerns. The bank tried to control the narrative. They issued statements about isolated incidents and rogue employees. They announced an internal investigation. They even reached out to me through intermediaries, offering a settlement if I would sign an NDA. I declined. By Wednesday, the story had expanded. Other news outlets were digging in. A former loan officer came forward with additional details. Customers began withdrawing funds. The stock fell another 22%. Thursday brought the first political reaction. The State Banking Committee announced hearings. 2 members of Congress called for investigations. Regulators acknowledged that they were reviewing the allegations. And then came the counterattack. On Friday morning, Meridian's lawyers filed a lawsuit against me for theft of proprietary information, breach of confidentiality, and defamation. Their PR team released statements questioning my motives, suggesting I was a disgruntled employee working with short sellers to manipulate the stock. They even implicated themselves in the process, claiming I had been fired for raising baseless concerns that were disruptive to operations. This inadvertently confirmed I had indeed raised compliance issues before being terminated. My whistleblower attorney called as soon as the lawsuit was filed. "This is actually good news," she said, surprising me. "They've just confirmed their retaliatory intent, and now they've opened themselves up to discovery, which means we can legally request all sorts of internal documents during the lawsuit proceedings." The weekend brought no respite. Social media was ablaze with discussions. Former and current Meridian employees were connecting on LinkedIn, sharing information. Customer withdrawals continued through online banking. By Monday, just 1 week after my plan was set in motion, the Federal Reserve had become involved, concerned about potential systemic risk if Meridian's issues triggered a run on other regional banks. 8 days after my plan was set in motion, federal agents entered Meridian's headquarters with search warrants. News helicopters circled overhead as boxes of documents were carried out. The CEO, CFO, and head of the Special Projects Division were all seen leaving with their attorneys. Meridian stock had lost 64% of its value. Depositors were lining up to withdraw their funds, despite assurances that their money was safe. Loan agreements were being called in by nervous partner institutions. The bank that had seemed too powerful, too connected to fail, was collapsing, not from a dramatic heist or a cyber attack, but from the simple exposure of its own actions. The FDIC stepped in to manage the mounting liquidity crisis. Trading of Meridian stock was suspended. The board of directors fired the CEO and CFO, hoping to demonstrate accountability, but it was too late to regain trust. The lawsuit against me was withdrawn, as Meridian's legal team advised them that proceeding would only lead to more damaging disclosures. Instead, they tried a new approach, a direct appeal from the new interim CEO, who had been brought in from outside the bank. "Mr. Morgan," he said when he called me directly, "I understand your concerns and the reasons behind your actions, but you must also understand that thousands of innocent employees and hundreds of thousands of customers stand to lose if Meridian fails completely. Would you be willing to work with us on a structured resolution? It was a clever appeal to my conscience, but I had already considered this outcome. I didn't create this situation, I replied. The previous leadership did. The best thing for employees and customers now is a transparent process that separates the legitimate parts of the bank from the fraudulent operations. That's for the regulators to manage, not me. The final blow came from an unexpected direction. James Peterson, the man who had essentially replaced me, agreed to testify against the executive team in exchange for immunity. His testimony revealed that Project Lighthouse wasn't just hiding bad loans, it was facilitating tax evasion for several of the bank's wealthiest clients. According to James, he had initially believed he was implementing legitimate financial innovation. But as he gained the trust of the executive team, he was brought deeper into their confidence and began to understand the true nature of the operations. When the scandal broke, he realized he was being positioned as the fall guy. The CEO was indicted on 32 counts, including conspiracy, fraud, and money laundering. Catherine and 3 other executives faced lesser but still serious charges. The bank itself was hit with the largest regulatory fine in the state's history. The real estate developer connected to Venture East Holdings was also indicted, along with 2 members of Meridian's board who had apparently been directly involved in approving the questionable loans in exchange for kickbacks. And me? I watched it all unfold from a distance, neither celebrating nor intervening further. This wasn't about personal satisfaction. It was about consequences. My attorney called with updates almost daily. They're trying to negotiate a deferred prosecution agreement for the bank itself, she informed me one evening. But the individual executives are facing serious prison time. Meanwhile, I had become something of a folk hero in financial compliance circles. Other whistleblowers reached out to share their stories. Compliance officers at other banks contacted me for advice on handling ethical dilemmas. A publisher approached me about writing a book. But with visibility came vulnerability. I received threatening messages from anonymous accounts. A suspicious car lingered outside my apartment building for several nights. My attorney arranged for private security and advised me to stay with friends for a while. You've made some powerful enemies, she warned, people who stand to lose everything. Yet for every threat, there were dozens of messages of support. From former colleagues, from bank customers, from ordinary people who were tired of seeing financial institutions operate as if they were above the law. Meridian didn't survive. The regulatory fines, legal settlements, and mass exodus of customers ensured that its assets were eventually sold off to competitors at fire sale prices. Thousands of employees, most of whom had done nothing wrong, had to find new jobs. That's the part that still troubles me. The frontline workers, the branch managers, the loan officers who were just doing their jobs. They suffered for the actions of people they'd never even met. I tried to help where I could. I created a network connecting former Meridian employees with job opportunities at other financial institutions. I spoke with recruiters about the quality of Meridian's staff, emphasizing that the problems had been at the executive level, not among the rank and file. As for me, I wasn't entirely untouched by the fallout. Meridian's lawyers tried to sue me for breach of confidentiality, though those cases were quickly dismissed, given the illegal activities I had exposed. Some former colleagues blamed me for the bank's collapse. Others reached out to thank me. "You did what I should have done years ago," wrote one senior manager in an email. I saw the signs but convinced myself it wasn't my problem. I have to live with that now. The CEO and CFO were eventually convicted and sentenced to federal prison. Catherine received a lighter sentence in exchange for her cooperation. 2 board members paid substantial fines but avoided jail time. The real estate developer connected to Venture East Holdings fled the country and is still a fugitive. The regulatory landscape changed too. Congress held hearings on the failure of oversight in regional banking. New regulations were proposed to close the loopholes Meridian had exploited. Other banks underwent more rigorous examinations as regulators, embarrassed by what they had missed, became more aggressive. I received job offers from regulatory agencies and competing banks impressed by my ethical stand and thorough understanding of compliance. But I declined them all. My experience had shown me the fundamental flaws in the system, how the incentives for profit too often overwhelm the safeguards meant to protect consumers and the economy. Instead, I started consulting for community banks and credit unions, helping them build robust compliance programs that serve their communities ethically. I occasionally testify before regulatory bodies about the warning signs of institutional corruption. 6 months after Meridian's collapse, I was having coffee at a small cafe when someone sat down across from me. It was Lisa, my former deputy. "I've been meaning to thank you," she said, "and also to apologize for not doing more when I was there." "You did plenty," I assured her. "Without your information, I might never have understood the full picture." She shook her head. "I should have spoken up sooner. I saw things changing, the culture shifting, but I told myself it wasn't that bad, that I was overreacting." "That's how it happens," I said. "Not all at once, but gradually. Lines get blurred, standards slip, until one day you realize you're part of something you never would have agreed to at the beginning." "How do you prevent that?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. By remembering that ethical boundaries aren't just abstract concepts, they protect real people from real harm, and by being willing to stand alone when necessary. A year after Meridian's collapse, I published a book about the experience, not as an expose of the bank's crimes, which were by then well documented, but as an exploration of the cultural and systemic factors that allow such situations to develop. How good people can become complicit in bad actions, how institutions can lose their way while believing they're simply evolving with the market. The book became required reading in business ethics courses at several universities. I began receiving invitations to speak at financial conferences, not as a whistleblower, but as an expert on institutional integrity. Life moved on. The financial world found new scandals to discuss. But the ripples from Meridian's collapse continued to spread in quieter ways, through revised regulations, through enhanced compliance training, through conversations in boardrooms about the true cost of cutting ethical corners. People often ask if I regret what I did, if I feel guilty about the bank's collapse, if I wish I had just walked away. The truth is more complicated. I regret that it came to this. I regret that an institution meant to serve its community became so corrupted by greed. I regret that thousands of innocent employees suffered. But do I regret exposing the truth? Never. The banking system only works when there's trust. Trust that deposits are safe. Trust that loans are sound. Trust that the people managing our money are doing so ethically and legally. When that trust is violated, the consequences should be severe, not just for the sake of punishment, but for the protection of everyone who depends on financial institutions. What happened to Meridian wasn't just about one person's revenge. It was about accountability. It was about consequences. It was about drawing a line and saying, this far, but no further. Sometimes I think about Catherine's words on that last day. This isn't personal. It's just business. She was wrong. Banking is intensely personal. It's about people's homes, their savings, their futures. When we pretend financial decisions are merely technical, divorced from their human impact, we create the conditions for ethical failure. 3 years after Meridian's collapse, I ran into James Peterson at a financial technology conference. I was speaking on a panel about ethics in banking innovation. He was attending as a representative of a regulatory consultancy. We acknowledged each other awkwardly at first, but later ended up sharing a table at lunch. "I've wanted to talk to you for a long time," he said, after we'd exchanged uncomfortable small talk. "I know you probably think I was part of the problem, that I took your job knowing what they were planning." "Were you?" I asked directly. He looked down at his plate. "Not at first. I genuinely thought they wanted someone with a more innovative approach to compliance. It was only later that I realized what innovative actually meant. And then I was in too deep," he admitted. "I had bought a house, started a family. I told myself I was just implementing what the executives wanted, that the responsibility was theirs. When everything fell apart, I realized how badly I'd compromised myself. I could have been angry, could have been vindictive. But looking at him, I mostly felt sad. We all have our breaking points, I said. Our moments of testing. Some fail, some pass. The important thing is what we learn from them. He nodded. I'm trying to use what I learned about the system, about myself, to do better now, to help prevent another Meridian. Isn't that all any of us can do? Learn from our failures, our compromises, our moments of courage or cowardice, and try to do better next time. So if you ever find yourself in a position where you're asked to compromise your ethics, to look the other way, to be a team player, when the team is breaking the rules, remember this story. Remember that systems are only as strong or as corrupt as the people who run them. And remember that sometimes the most powerful act of loyalty isn't to an institution, but to the principles it's supposed to uphold. Would you have done what I did? I don't know. I hope you never have to make that choice. But I do know this. In a world where it often seems like the powerful face no consequences, sometimes, just sometimes, justice finds a way. And it begins with one person saying, "No, this is wrong, and I won't be part of it." If you found this story compelling, please like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden world of finance.